So what is the deal with TDD? Why do I want to, why exactly TDD? I think that from my professional experience that the one of the aspects of information technology of programming, which was the most confusing for me personally. Every time when I was coming on the project and we were saying like, okay, we're going to use TDD, I had no idea what to expect. So TDD, every time that was something else, something different. And the first thing I learned that it's not a problem to have a lack of knowledge in something. The biggest problem is when you're confident and you're absolutely sure that your knowledge is correct. So it's all, this story is basically started when I was working on a project as a beginning of my career as a junior developer. And as myself, there was many other junior developers and we were working, of course, there were some mid developers, senior developers, and they said, they came at one day and they said, we're going to use TDD on the project. So for us, it was unknown, it was something new. And when we asked our leads, like what is TDD, can you explain for us? And we basically, we were told at some point that TDD is when we write all the tests. It's when we write all the tests before implementing the business logic. And now I understand that it's not a problem in all tests. I understand like what is the benefit in TDD. But back then, for me, it was like a rule. Like, okay, I need to write all the tests, and other team members on the same level of expertise as myself, like junior developers, we believed in this, that it's exactly how it should be done. And our reaction was something like this. From the first time, okay, we don't know, we don't have enough knowledge to understand why exactly it should be implemented like this. But we try to think of it, we try to find different ways, like how could it be beneficial for us? And we couldn't, we didn't succeed. So that was our reaction for a couple of weeks until the decision was somehow negotiated. That was me and my teammates. So why not? What was basically the problem with this approach back then on this project? First of all, the requirements were changing with the same speed as the customer's mood. I mean, I'm pretty sure that many of you used to work on startup projects or small, like just raise a hand, who used to work on startup projects? Yeah. So I'm pretty sure you're very well like aware of how fast the requirements can change, how fast the customer mood can change. And that was for us basically the main problem. How could we implement all the tests for the feature, not all the tests for the whole product, of course, for the feature itself, when we know that after 5 minutes, it's not about days, it's like after 5 minutes, our customer will call us and say that, oh, listen, I changed my mind, now we're going to do this in this way. So for us, it was very very confusing, like how can it work? We were confused, not because of how fast the requirements were changing, but also because we expected that we will be stuck in this infinite loop of writing tests, getting a call from the customer, the requirements change, and we will need to rewrite those tests again. And that will be over and over again. And we were frustrated just from the thoughts of it, not even starting to go into implementation phase. And of course, we had lack of understanding what is the purpose of that kind of approach. Not TDD, we had lack of understanding why do we need to have to write tests. Because I remember myself when I was a junior developer, and I saw that if you're a cool programmer, you don't write tests, you just write the code which works from the very beginning. Like, you write code and it works. And that's what makes you a professional. And of course, I was wrong, and I should have watched less amount of movies about hackers and programmers. I think maybe I got this idea from there. But basically, that was our understanding. What should we do with tests? Instead of really trying to understand why our code fails, what's the problem, we were just removing the tests which failed because we were not able to understand why do we need this. And thanks God, we decided to go in this project without TDD because I mean, of course, that's obvious. If people just don't know and don't understand how and why should we use TDD, it would not bring any benefits because it would not be implemented. The practice would not be adopted in the right way, in the correct way. So the next story I had, found the bug, fixed it, write a test to prove it was fixed. It was the second time I met a TDD practice on a project. When I joined the project and they said, we're going to do this, we're going to adopt TDD in this way. And that's how we're going to do this. And it's not like we had no internet or no books to read about it. It's just we were not certain that we understand it correctly. So every time when there was a more senior developer was coming to us and saying like, yeah, that's how it should work. We were like, okay. We will, I mean, we had no other choice. We will just believe in how other people are saying, and we will try to roll with it. And we will see how it works. And it was working. But there was some drawbacks, like if there is a part of code which was changed, or maybe some new features were introduced and it was not tested, there was no regression testing, we had no idea if there is any bugs or defects in it. So it was like a bit of mystery in our project implementation process, like do we have a defect or not? We will find out on production, I guess. So did it work in general? It did. Partially. So we knew that we would not have the same problems as we had before because we had a defect, we fixed it, and we covered it with tests. But still, code coverage was very inconsistent. So as you can imagine, we wrote a feature, okay, maybe we wrote some of the tests, maybe we had no time for this because we had some deadlines. It was all depends, but we had no strict requirement that we need to have tests. So sometimes when new people were joining our project, it was like the part of the system, there's a couple of tests, and for them it seemed like something happened, like refactoring or restructuring. Some tests were moved somewhere, some tests remained in the same place, and they didn't understand what is happening in this. Like it was a completely messy structure of our test, structure of the project, and in general. And for us, it turned out in the same way. In a couple of months, not months, like almost after 1 year working in this with this approach, we realized that we on ourselves are not able to basically understand what is happening in this part of the system anymore because it was just a bit messy and it was very inconsistent. Tests were written to ensure good code quality, and this is true many times when we were changing or refactoring some part of the code. A lot of tests were failing, which are not really related to the changes to the business logic itself, just because we were trying to test implementation details, trying to ensure that we are using like this library or this specific methods, and nothing about actual business logic, if our system works correctly. So still we had no guarantee that our business logic won't get broken with new changes. We still had no guarantee that our system actually works correctly. Every time when we had a new release or new major changes, we needed to do regression testing manually. So we had like three manual testers at least. And they were doing this all over and over and over again because we were not able to guarantee that our tests are really going to ensure the quality of the product. Also, another thing is, because it's still, I was like junior, maybe somewhere close to mid-level, very often I was receiving bugs, not because it's really big problem, but because our senior developers decided to like give us something to boost our confidence. Sorry, I should have. Yeah, so it's basically me solving the bug and then senior developer who added the bug to boost my confidence. It's not that someone was adding this, like those defects on purpose. It's just the senior developers, they usually implemented the whole feature and they missed small pieces in it. And then the defect got traced and he already knew what is the problem. He already knew what is happening in there. So he was giving us less experienced developers those defects because he knew that we will be able to fix it easily. And for him, it was like he was raising new generation of developers. For us, it was boosting the confidence, but it was not always the case that this defect was really a problem and critical problem. Even if we would cover this with test, it still would not ensure that this feature would work correctly in the future. It was just small bricks, small modules of our logic. Luckily, after that, I had some time to grow professionally, learn, read some books, go on the conferences, learn a bit more about TDD. And when I was already on a more or less senior level, the next time when I met TDD practice, it was in the context or 100% code coverage. And back then, I already knew, like, okay, if we are using TDD, it's test-driven development. We're writing first tests, then implementing our logic, then we are making refactoring. Ideally, in the vacuum, in the perfect world which not exist, we will reach 100% code coverage. But this is what, like, this is not true. This doesn't work this way. But still, it was written like this in books, in some of the talks I was listening to. So I was like, okay, let's give it a try. Let's see if it's going to work this way. But I already was a bit skeptic about TDD approach from my past because I knew that doesn't matter that I was not using TDD before. I was told that we were using TDD and I was skeptical about it. So in my head, 100% code coverage, it would be something like, basically we would just write tests for tests, just for them to exist, just to cover every single line of code we have, to ensure 100% code coverage number, but not for our quality, not to ensure that our products really work in a way how it should be. So, as you might guess, that something went wrong again. And it resulted that critical defects were still not there. So we were trying to have this 100% code coverage number, and it was great. But I still remember it as yesterday that we were testing even getters and setters and properties. Like we were testing every single line of code, running this tool to check the code coverage if everything is green, but we never like thought of but what our tests are actually doing. If they are really testing like the logic itself, how the product should work. And it's resulted many times that we had really critical defects. Some of them we found on the production during the major releases, for example. Not only because the integration part was completely missing, so our components, we were building some microservices, our components were not communicating between each other, like integration part was completely missing, but also inside every microservice, there was something crucial was missing. And of course, again, the same tests were not about tests were about code quality. If we are testing getters and setters, you can imagine that it's not much of a value from those tests, not much of a benefits. Also, beside this, we had a lot of mocks, and as I know now, mocks in the testing is kind of a code smell, and we basically were mocking everything. So our test was like mock, and then we set up expected result, what we want to have from executing a method or function, and then we test if it works correctly. But like what kind of information and benefit we can have from this test if everything is mocked, if everything is set up, and like we had no chance to test the real behavior. And development time significantly increased as a result of overcomplications. We were not writing first tests and then implementing the logic. Again, that's the problem why it was not TDD practice after all. But how it was working, that we were taking feature in implementation. We were writing the feature itself, and then we needed to cover it with tests. And then we needed to ensure, give the 100% number to our whoever was reviewing pull requests, that it's really covered on 100%. So 1 week on implementation, 1 week on writing unit tests. Unit tests or whatever, it was doubled in time. The development time was increased like 2 times because we needed to write all those tests. We needed to fix all the tests which failed before because we made some changes or refactoring. And it was extremely exhausting and frustrating for me, for the rest of my team. And at some point, people even started to quit. Like, I just cannot spend that much time on rewriting the tests or writing the tests when they are meaningless. There was absolutely no benefit in having that amount of tests. But That was the time when, luckily, I had an opportunity to work within the same company, but was on a different project. And they were testing behavior in this project. So instead of kind of trying to use and adopt TDD practice, they said, no, TDD is not for us. We are using BDD. So what was the difference, just briefly, in the bullet points? They were writing tests first. I mean, that's a major difference. When you have a test-first approach, you first write tests and see that this test fails. After this, they were writing only useful code which is needed to pass these tests. And it resulted that we had the minimum number of tests that is needed to cover our use cases. Just a bit more context how it was working. We had scenarios. So first of all, we were using Cucumber and SpecFlow testing for the BDD approach. We had scenarios, and we had a couple of use cases in this scenario. As a user, I want to open this project, and I want to see this and this behavior. So that's how we implemented our tests. We had like English written, like normal readable format of our tests. As a user, I want to open this project, and I want to see this result. We wrote this test, and this test was failing. So we were working we were doing pair programming. So I was working with the QA engineer, and QA engineer wrote this test and gave it to me to implement the logic itself. I was implementing the logic, and I saw that my test now is passing. And we were repeating these cycles over and over again until all the use cases were covered. So we were working in a pair. And this was resulting, like we had a minimum number of tests. We had like 3 or 4 tests per feature because we had scenarios. We knew what should be behavior of it. And I was really, really surprised how easy it was. Because when I moved to this project, I thought like, okay, again, now we're going to have the same story, but it's going to be called BDD instead of TDD. But no, this time it's actually worked and worked perfectly fine. And this was not a new project. It was project with 20 years or 25 years of like code base. It was a legacy system, but it worked. And they had tests, which was those tests were covering the whole system. And it was extremely easy to extend this system, or it was quite easy to fix a defect, even if something was found through like after the years, or maybe something was refactored or changed. It was very easy to spot the problem and fix it. So I finally realized it was not that sudden. Of course, it took me a while to realize that all the time before, when I was trying to kind of adopt TDD practice, all those basically opinions and all this understanding what is TDD, it was not like completely wrong. I was just understanding it in the wrong way. So the first one we had, when I was working on a project when we were supposed to implement all the tests, I realized that it's not the idea of implementing all the tests, but idea to write one single test, watch it fail, watch it fail, and after implementing our code, see that it succeeded, and then make a refactor. So we wanted to have this red-green refactor cycle. I realized that my first project had the chance to succeed with kind of this TDD practice if only we will remove this all word in the statement of what is TDD. Not implementing all the tests, but implementing the only one single test which fails and start moving from this direction. The second point, that TDD assists in better software design. TDD, to be able to, in general, to use this practice, to adopt TDD, we should be able to break our code into small bricks, small pieces, because otherwise we would not be able to write a proper test for this. So it never ensures, it never guarantees that TDD will with TDD, you will have a perfect architecture or perfect software design, but it will definitely help you to improve and understand that you're moving in the wrong direction on the early stages. And that was something I realized on the practice when I was working on this BDD project. Of course, it's something different, but I saw how the my mistakes in how I wanted to design some parts of the system or how I wanted to implement the feature, it was not possible because I needed first to write the test. So when we were writing tests, it already was super clear for us that we have those bricks and modules of the code and how to basically connect them between each other. And I realized that it's really the TDD or BDD will assist in better design. And the last thing is it was much easier to refactor and hand over our code. As I mentioned before, the project I was working on had like 20-25 years of code base. So you can imagine that if you have a defect and you want to go and fix it, it's not easy to find where you should do this, but even if you will find it, if you ensure that, okay, I found the problem, I fixed it, there was no guarantee that you would not affect any other part of the system. But when I was working again on this BDD project, on the project with BDD approach, I had no such problems because I was opening part of the system. The only thing I needed to do is to find a test which was covering this part of the system or feature, read it and understand. If I would change this part, it was very clear for me what other part of the system might be affected because it was all written in there. There was the whole scenario expressing like what will happen, what do we need to expect, what will change, and what other parts will be related on this part. And few more. Just a sip of water. A few more. All those previous points, it took me a while. I tried to understand it from my experience. I tried to I learned it from my experience and I tried to understand it over the years. But once I basically understood what I was doing wrong and I started to work with TDD, like when I started to do TDD in the right way, basically, I would say like this. After that, I met also a couple of misconceptions, I would say, which were basically, I saw myself from the other side. When I was in the position when I know what is TDD now and I know how to use it properly, or I assume that I know, maybe again I'm doing this mistake, the people were reaching to me also with some other misconceptions and misunderstanding, and I actually quite like them, and I want to also point them out. But TDD is too time consuming. TDD might be time-consuming from the very beginning when we just start adopting this practice, when we start working with this. It seem to be like this because we first need to write tests, we need to implement our logic, we need to refactor, and over again. So we need to spend much more time to deliver first version or first version of our application. If we would do this just in a way that we will implement our code, of course it would be much faster. But the benefits of TDD, they have been tested on real projects by the big companies like Microsoft and IBM. And I'm pretty sure that maybe many of you already saw this quote a couple of times at least. But they found, those companies, the corporations, they found that adopting this process is very, very beneficial, and they made this only one-time testing, one-time testing. They're not doing this all the time. I mean, I'm not sure, but at least that's what was written in the article. But pre-release defect density of the 4 products decreased between 40 and 90%. So they proved it in the real life that TDDs really could be beneficial. The next thing, red, green, and always refactor. I witnessed when some of my colleagues were struggling a bit because they wrote a test which was failing, they implemented the logic, and they were doing this refactoring for the sake of refactoring. And I saw like why it's taking so much time to implement tests and implement the code for it, because I need to refactor. And that's not true. You don't need to refactor. You can refactor if you feel like this might be beneficial, of course, go for it. But it's not always necessary. It's not like if you don't refactor, then you're not doing TDD. No, that's not true. And perfect is the enemy of good. We have to remember that it's much easier could be, if this is work, like if we wrote a test and we wrote an implementation for it and it works and we don't really see what we can refactor by now, then great, leave it, move on, move to the next feature, move to the next test, because later on you might have this need to refactor, but you will be able to save some time for you now if you will just keep moving until you really see, until this need is transparent for you. And simple code need no tests. I would say that even until recent, I had exactly the same opinion that simple code need no tests. Why would I cover like every single line of tests? Sometimes it's obvious what this part of the what this part of the code is doing. But it's not about is it obvious or not. It's not about if everyone can understand it or not. Sometimes it's about the tests are also our documentation and specification. Sometimes we write tests not to make sure that our code works correctly, but to make it easier for our teammates, for our colleagues, or anyone else to just open it and not read every line and try to understand what is happening in there, even if it's easy, but just read the test and make it faster and easier to understand what is happening in there. And that was the last point. I would not make it any longer because I'm pretty sure that we can talk about TDD the whole day. On this note, I want to thank you for listening to my session. Sorry. Okay. Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot for listening to my session. If you have any questions or comments, there is a Twitter or LinkedIn. I hope you enjoyed it, and if not, please write me a feedback if something was wrong or you disagree with something. I'm always happy to chat and not argue, but discuss whatever points you saw here. And for now, again, thanks and enjoy the rest of the conference.